Hey everyone, we are super excited to be spreading awareness and destigmatizing mental health in the Black and Brown communities.
This podcast is a safe place for us to discuss our adversities and even our shortcomings. We all have a story.
Just remember, no matter what we go through, our story goes on.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 4 of Our Story Goes On. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Yes.
We're so excited to be here and back. It's been like really nice talking with you guys and
Absolutely.
like coming in and just giving our perspective and little ideas and whatnot. But today we are going to be talking about anxiety in relationships and attachment styles.
Good stuff.
But I want to ask Sin, like, what can that look like? Like, what can anxiety in relationships look like? What can attachment styles look like? Specifically, anxious, preoccupied attachment styles.
Yeah. So today we're specifically talking about anxiety in relationships and then how that could relate to your attachment style. So first, I think a lot of people have never really heard of attachment styles unless you were introduced to it or someone talked to you about it, or maybe you're in the field. I think it's something that is not as talked about as much because it actually could relate to a lot of different things in your adult relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, but a lot of people relate attachment styles to romantic relationships more than anything else. But so anxiety in relationships, right? We all know what anxiety is, right? So then how does that play a role in your relationship? So what that could look like if you are anxious in a relationship, it could look something like often worrying about upsetting your partner, requiring constant reassurance from your partner, like getting that validation from them. Another thing is also overthinking if you upset your partner. So that could also kind of look like anxiety. Worrying something bad happened to them is also another sign of having anxiety in a relationship. And what I mean by that is worrying that something happened to them if they're not responding to you, if they haven't reached their destination at a certain time or anything like that. And then also another sign of anxiety in relationships can be avoiding difficult conversations with your partner because you don't want to make them upset, or you want to avoid having a difficult conversation to maintain the happiness or maintain the calmness in a relationship. So those are all signs of what it could look like to have anxiety in a relationship. And it's very common. And I'm noticing people are talking about it a little bit more, which is great. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of course, that's just a few signs. That's not like all the signs. Everyone experiences anxiety differently, of course. But those are like more of the common signs.
Yeah. One thing I do want to input to piggyback off what you said is I feel like attachment styles aren't really talked about because they kind of either shed a light on parenthood or like kind of dim it a little bit. So it kind of like looks at how like you were parented and how you were raised, like nurturing versus
Nature
and things like that.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of people don't even like want to touch on the subject because they don't want to be like, oh, I had a bad mom or anything like that. And not necessarily does it mean that you had a bad mom or a bad parent. It could have been like that parent dealt with you the way they could, in the best way they could at the time.
Absolutely.
But yes, I think that I definitely have a anxious, preoccupied attention,
which we will get into what that means.
Yes, we're gonna get into that. But for me, I often find myself like needing to be reassured or like kind of like
validated.
Yeah, validated in a sense. Like for me, like if I text my boyfriend or something, he doesn't text me back, like I'm automatically like my mind's gone. Like by the time he texts me back, I got an attitude. I'm not willing to talk. Okay. By the time he texts me or call me back, I'm just like, no. And it's mostly because I don't like being in that like state of mind. But at the same time, that's something that I have to work on, and that's not for him to work on. That's something that I have to take on and like master myself. But I have a lot of anxiety in my relationships. Not just like from like bad experiences. I've had like crazy relationships, like that have been draining and abusive and just whatever else. But I've had good relationships too, and I don't want to like discount them or like just like throw them away because they've been good. But for me, it's more of like I'm so used to being disappointed or like getting my hopes up for something and then it not like panning out the way it's supposed to pan out. So then like I don't know, like I set expectations, and I hear a lot like in our generation that you're not supposed to set expectations, but how are you supposed to know like what you deserve, like how like that you're getting what you deserve, or that like you're being treated a proper way, or like like how are you supposed to be content with yourself if you don't have expectations for people? And how are you going to set your boundaries or like, you know, like how are you going to do that if you don't have expectations for people? So for me, I have certain expectations for the people that I date and let into my life. And if they don't meet them expectations, it causes me anxiety.
So like when you say expectations though, are you referencing to standards or expectations? I think there's a little bit of a difference.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I feel like with standards, though, like, of course I have standards for who I date. However, those standards are what get you to the door, okay? Those standards are what get me okay, like I'm ready
I'll date
to talk.
you, and now I'm ready to maybe open up a little bit. And then now I'm now expecting this of you. But of course, like, in a sense of you're having these expectations, but you're not like listing them off to this person, say this is what I expect you to do, this is how I expect you to act.
Yes, no, not doing that, no. But I do like, I don't know, like I have had like issues in the past with not voicing myself as much, and like I keep a lot in, and like I feel like I have to be silent in my relationships, or like when I feel discomfort, or like when I'm in pain, or like when I'm hurt or something, like it doesn't matter. So like for the sake of the relationship, just keep my mouth shut.
And that is exactly like anxious attachment style. So that's really what it relates to. But we're going to define what anxious preoccupied attachment means. But before Joe defines it, I want to start with anxious ambivalent. So you might, just to not confuse people when you like maybe research into attachment styles or anything like that. But anxious ambivalent is what we refer to as an attachment style when we are children. And then as we get into adults, that's where the anxious preoccupied comes in. And I think a lot of times when you do your research, if anyone wants to, that you'll see that you really won't see so much about anxious ambivalent. But anxious ambivalent is kind of like the precursor to anxious preoccupied, because obviously as a child, our needs change as we get older and as we go into adulthood. So what is anxious preoccupied attachment, Josephine?
I'm here with the definition.
With the exact definition, so people have an idea.
Yes. So anxious attachment style is a form of insecure attachment style marked by a deep fear of abandonment. Anxiously attached people tend to be very insecure about their relationships, often worrying that their partner will leave them, and thus always hungry for validation.
Yes.
Anxious attachment is associated with neediness or clingy behavior, such as getting very anxious when your partner doesn't text back fast enough.
Is that really what it says?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And constantly feeling like your partner doesn't care enough about you. And constantly feeling that your partner doesn't care enough about you. Anxious attachment is also known as anxious preoccupied attachment, and is generally aligns with the anxious
ambivalent.
Yes, thank you. Attachment style, or anxious resistant attachment style observed among children. Some 19% of adults have the anxious attachment style, according to Hazen Shaver's research.
Yeah, so that's basically what it is. And I know that So basically, anxious preoccupied is associated with inconsistent parenting. And just like any other definition, doesn't necessarily mean that you may fall into it 100%. Maybe you're like, hey, yeah, I do have some of those traits, but not 100% of those traits. And that's totally okay. There's no such thing as 100% anything in life, really. I mean, at least that's how I think about things. Yeah. So, but yeah, like it really is about inconsistent parenting. So the anxious ambivalent, like we had mentioned, was that it's when a parent kind of only goes to their child when they need that comfort. So they'll go to the child for a hug because they're upset, or they feel off, so they want to then feed off their kids' great energy, right? Because all children are always happy for the most part, right? And then when that child needs a hug or needs that love, their parent may do it or may not. It's inconsistent. So that's when you get older, you start to become anxious because now you have that thought process of, I need to be there for my partner 100%. But if they're not, I need validation. Am I doing something wrong? Am I doing something right? You need that reassurance that they're not going to leave you, because your parent might have done something like that where they weren't there for you when you needed them. So that's really what it comes down to. And again, like it all fluctuates, right? I mean, maybe your parent did do that as a child, but as Joe mentioned, a lot, I think especially back then, that a lot of parents did the best that they could in terms of their own traumas. I think I think culturally as well too. Let's just be real.
Yes.
And the Black and brown communities just tend to go through a little bit more. Yes. Not always, of course. We don't want to like put that in a box, but in terms of socioeconomic, in terms of hardships, being, maybe if you're an immigrant coming from a specific country, obviously life is way more difficult for you as opposed to that you've been living here for hundreds of years. Right. And by here, we mean America. So yeah, I mean, so a lot of that does play a role in how you may look in your relationships. And so I think, I mean, Joe and I, when we were prepping for this episode, you tend to think like, what is my attachment style? Because I want to make sure that people know as well that there are also other attachment styles. But for today's purposes, we didn't want to go through all of them because there's 3 more. Yeah. And it's a lot. Yes. But this research is really great because I don't think a lot of people tend to think about it in terms of how you were raised and then how it then affects the way you are in your romantic relationships. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes, and I also want to piggyback off what you said really quick. One thing we have to always remember is that some of our parents were very young when they had us.
Yes, very true.
Just like we don't have it all together, they didn't have it all together. So, that's one thing I've learned as an adult. I have to show mercy and compassion to my parents no matter what.
It's all about healing too.
Yeah, mm-hmm. I'm not saying that my parents were the worst and they strapped me to change and stuff and just went at it. But right. I'm just saying that there were times where I didn't feel like my parents met my needs, and
100%, yeah,
that is okay. That's fine. That's life. That's what's gonna happen, and we just have to learn how to self-soothe and work through those moments.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's okay. I think that now we can say it's okay because again, we're not blaming them for how we are now. Yeah. I think that's what's most important to remember, that's part of healing. That's part of processing trauma, that you're no longer blaming your parents for how you are as an adult. You are now understanding that, yes, my parents did this because they probably had it more difficult. They were projecting their own trauma onto me because they didn't know any better. Mm-hmm. And then now as an adult, I have to make sure that I am healing the way that I'm going to heal. And I'm no longer using that as an excuse to basically be a shitty person. Yes. Right? Because I think a lot of that too is oh, well, I remember I knew someone that said that oh, well, I had a really rough childhood, so this is the way I am. And I'm like,
I hate those people.
I'm okay, but is that really a reason for you to be an asshole?
Yeah,
no, of course. I think I think a lot of times we as children, not all the time, of course, some people have gone through trauma and sometimes they remember it, sometimes they don't, right? And then if you do remember it, why are you using that as an excuse to just kind of lead your life in a negative way as an adult?
Some people really attach their identity to things that they have
speaking
gone
of what we talked
through.
about last episode.
Yes, they really do. And for me, I have been through trauma as a child, and even as an adult, honestly. But for me, one thing that I've always tried to do, I've always tried to like make an effort to do, is not attach myself to that trauma. I don't ever want to be a victim. I'm sorry. I don't care if I'm in the paper or something, like I don't want to be considered a victim, because if you're considered a victim, or if you even look at yourself as a victim, you're giving somebody else the power over your life. You're giving someone else like power over like how things come, like the outcome of your life. And like, wow, like, no, I can't do that. I need to take like responsibility and accountability for my life now moving forward. Like, yes, this may have happened to me, and yes, it was unfortunate. However, like, no, I don't want to be a bitter person. No, I don't want to be an angry person. And no, I'm not going to let this bring me down. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to pick my panties up, put my big girl shoes on, and I'm going to go about the world like a big girl. Like, I'm not going to let anyone take any power from me, because I know whose daughter I am, and I know the power that I harbor and that I manifest, and that I can pull from within myself. So I'm not a victim, and I'm not attaching myself to that.
Right. You're not identifying with that. However, I think it's good to try to change that word. I always talk about this with my clients. I feel like we're digressing from the topic, but that's totally okay. You're not a victim, you're a survivor.
Yes.
That's really, I think as soon as you change that word or that wording, I'm not a victim, I am a survivor. It just makes a world of a difference, because yes, unfortunately, when you hear the word victim, it means that something bad happened to you, but then it almost sounds like it happened to you, and like that's where the story ends, right? But when you're a survivor, that means that you're constantly surviving from that event or multiple events that might have happened and everything. And of course that takes time. It takes time to heal. It takes time to even determine that, or to feel that way, like, hey, I am better than what happened to me. Now I'm ready to move on. Because that does take a lot of time too. It takes a lot of growth and a lot of healing and whatever.
And experience.
And
too.
experience.
Like, we need experiences. We need to go through things, because how do we grow without that?
Exactly. Absolutely. So just kind of reeling back to the anxiety in relationships. And like I said, a lot of this could come from your childhood. And again, I think a lot of times adults don't think about that, right? Because personally for me, I tend to have anxiety in my marriage. And I mean, I'm newly married. So I would say before we got married, my anxiety has definitely reduced though in the last year. But for me, I went through a pretty traumatic relationship before I met my husband. And I try to think to myself, I'm like, was I anxious in that relationship, or was I just kind of like flowing because of how toxic it was and how terrible it was for me? But I feel that from that, it's unfortunately did bleed into my relationship with my husband, because I'm not going to sugarcoat it, I moved on pretty fast. So
but it happens.
So obviously, but it all ended up being fine, because, now he's my husband. So, but at the end of the day, I do have anxiety in my relationship, and I work at it when I feel that I do have the anxiety coming up. But like I said, it has reduced a lot. I've worked towards that. I've done a lot of things to reduce that, because a lot of it does come with communication and with trust and all of that. So I do have anxiety in my relationships to the point where, or in my marriage, not my relationships. I'm only married to one person. So, but in general, like it just comes up, and I think it just has a lot to do with my experiences, and I try my very best to just tell myself it's okay. And he knows it too. He knows I have anxiety. He's a witness of it all the time. And so he does try to do a lot of things to reassure or to communicate whatever it is. But it's just kind of like an unfortunate thing sometimes, because you feel that it's debilitating at times, or it's just frustrating, because it's like, why can't I just be fine? Why can't I just be like, all right, whatever, I'm going with the flow? Like, so, because for me, my anxiety doesn't really come so much from like needing that reassurance or like that constant validation. It's more like worrying in a sense. Not worrying that he's going to leave me, because I know he won't.
Okay. And that's my period.
It's not so much about that as much as it's kind of hard to explain. It's just kind of like, I think it's more just the worrying for me. And that's because I already have anxiety to begin with. So
I just want to touch on that. I feel like when we go into like a new relationship and like we try our best not to bring our past into it, but honestly, every relationship for me anyway, has been a little traumatic. Like I had to, like, I love this person probably like with all my heart at the time, and I just feel like my heart grows every year. So like, it was not that big last year. So he had the least part of me. So that's how I'm just kidding. But like we try to like not think of it as like we're bringing old relationships into our new relationship, but if we
it's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. And if we like really think about it, like we kind of like act like victims in a sense. And that's why I was touching on that a little bit, because like for females, like if one wrong thing goes wrong, it's like, oh my gosh, I knew it. This happened to me before. I couldn't trust you. Like, it's one of those things like, wow, like, are you kidding me? Like, are you joking? This actually happened to me. But it's like, we really kind of like take things so personally. And it's just like, no, like, he ain't text that girl because I wasn't cute. He texted that girl because he was bored or something. Like, I'm cute. I'm that girl. Like, I'm lit right now. I'm about to graduate. I'm about to move. Okay, I'm making this money. Okay, like I'm lit right now. It's not me. It's you. So I feel like we really have to like stop feeding these like anxieties
demons.
Anxieties in our relationships. Like, no, let's not feed it. Things that do feed it though are like cheating. Like if you've experienced cheating in your relationship, forget about it.
But what we mean by this, right, is that like how the anxious attachment could go up if you're in a certain relationship is what you're saying, right?
Yes. So like if
because
like,
you could have like a secure attachment feeling pretty good, and then you just get into like that one relationship where it just kind of like makes you feel less secure. And I know a lot of people might argue that like, oh, well, if you were already secure, then you would have left that, or you wouldn't have continued on that because you had that secure attachment. Sure, maybe in some scenarios, but in others, you just never know. That's just not the way that life works.
Right.
Nothing's ever cookie cut. Is that the word? Something like that.
Yeah, it sounds right.
Cookie cutter.
But yes, like Sin said, like things that kind of like feed or like make anxiety go up in a relationship are definitely like cheating and like dishonesty and not being there emotionally for your partner. Like if you know that your partner already experienced anxiety or like they've been through things already, why are you texting another female?
Right.
Like why are you doing anything that's gonna like cause any like
increase anxiety?
Yeah, and symptoms of anxiety. Like I feel like, of course, we're not perfect, and especially when you choose to love someone young or at a young age, or like even like when you don't even know what healthy looks like, it really takes a lot out of you, and you really have to try. And we also have to forget that, remember that love is supposed to be unconditional.
Right.
So we're supposed to be able to make it through mistakes, and we're supposed to be able to make it through things that like cause us discomfort or maybe hurts our feelings at the time. Like we're supposed to be able to do that.
Right.
If we can't do that with one person, how can we do that with other people in our lives? Like it doesn't add up. So for me, insecurity is another thing I think feeds
increases the anxiety.
Anxiety, yes.
Insecurity from you or from your partner?
I think insecurity, like in a sense, like having issues within the relationship. Like I'm not secure in my relationship. Like either I'm going out or my dude's going out, or like we're experiencing different things like financial issues. Like if you have kids, things with your kids, like different responsibilities. Like even like we often forget that with our partners, the world tugs at our partners too. Like when we come together, but the world is still tugging at your partner. So at the end of the day, whatever anxiety or issue that your partner deals with, we don't fully understand it to like we only fully understand it to the capacity that they explain it to us.
Right.
But we don't really know what they're going through. We don't know how they're dealing with it. We don't know how their internal battle is. So for us, like I feel like as for females, yes, we may experience anxiety, and yes, things may feel uncomfortable when our dude or like our guys dealing with things, but we should also remember like
There's noise going on outside.
Yes, we should also remember that we're not perfect either. Like there's times where we fall short. There's times when they need us to meet a certain need and we're not meeting that need. Like there's certain things that like the world doesn't revolve around us. I have to tell myself this, unfortunately, because I feel like this is my world, but there's people in it.
But also males too go through anxious attachment for sure. I just think that unfortunately when we're talking about how what certain things could increase that anxiety, I think we just have this notion that like I don't know, I guess like males might just do maybe a little bit more in terms of like not because men just don't really express their feelings as much as women do. And so maybe that's a lot of it too. Like, hey, if I'm feeling anxious and you're just sitting there, you're just like looking at me be anxious and you're not communicating, then you know, how could we talk about this? How could we feel comfortable in talking about this too? So, but definitely those things can certainly increase anxiety. It's just like the dishonesty, not communicating, not having that support from your partner can certainly increase that attachment or that anxious attachment that we should say, because all that could cause anxiety. And then of course everyone's story is different. Maybe you experience that for a few weeks or months and then you're like, nah, I'm out of here. I don't want this person to make me feel that anxious anymore. So now, but that also again comes with like healing, and good for you if you are that strong to be able to leave a relationship. You know, if you feel like this just isn't, because some people can't do that, right? Some people stay for a long time and they just realize like, wow, like I didn't realize how messed up this whole thing was either. But how can we kind of step out of this zone? Because it's important to remember that if you are experiencing anxious attachment, are ways that you can kind of go into the secure attachment. And it all starts within you. As much as you may think it has a lot to do with that other person, it starts with you. So one thing that we could try to recommend is self-reflection and therapy.
Yes.
Like, I really feel that seeing a therapist is very helpful to be able to open all of this up. Because who else are you going to talk to, right, about like your inner child and your traumatic experiences and have that kind of free judgment zone? Therapy can really help you start that self-reflection and realize what your attachment style is, and then how you can maybe better it, how you can manage it, and how you can kind of step out of that zone. Right. And another thing is also like what Joe mentioned, is to not internalize things so much and to not take things personally. So if something does happen, a lot of times we do internalize what our partner does and we blame ourselves, or we tend to think that they're doing these actions because of something that we did, or of how we look, or of how we do, or whatever. So it's important just to make sure that you're not internalizing that. Right. And a way that you can do that is just kind of having a way to not internalize things is to practice internal validation. And internal validation is simple as something that you're doing for yourself every day. Daily compliments, literally looking at yourself in the mirror and telling yourself, I am beautiful, I can do this, I am powerful. And that all comes with compliments and affirmations. So those are a couple of things that you can do to try to step out of the anxious attachment. And then also like telling your partner your needs from the very, very beginning. Like, let them know that you might have some anxiety. Yeah. I know that sometimes a lot of this comes with the stigma behind mental health, and it's difficult to express that to a new person. But if they are serious about you and they are caring enough, anxiety is just feeling worried. And it could definitely be a lot more than that for a lot of people. But if you explain it to them, you're expressing your needs to them, and that should really help kind of guide the way of just feeling less anxious throughout your relationship with that person.
Yes, and diminish some of that worry, because listen, I feel you. It's like, I love you so much. I just want you to live in my skin. Or can I jump in? Joke.
So those are some tips that you can do to try to get out of the anxious, preoccupied attachment. Just taking care of yourself. Because in order to love and to feel good around another person, you have to feel that way about yourself. I know that sounds super cliche, but it's the truth.
And that's on period. Our affirmation this week.
Yes, we're just going to close out.
Yes, is going to be, I am content with myself no matter what others think of me. So yes. I'm the bomb. Okay?
Yes, no matter what. We live for ourselves, not other people. And that's basically it for today.
That's it.
We hope everyone has a great week, and we'll see you for next episode. Bye.